The night my son locked me out of his house, the rain felt like needles against my skin. I stood there in my thin robe, barefoot on the freezing porch, watching through the glass as Ethan turned his back on me while his wife calmly pulled the curtains shut like I didn't exist. At 67 years old, I had never felt so small, so disposable. But what they didn't know, what neither of them had bothered to remember, was that the house they had just thrown me out of was never truly theirs. If this moment already hit something deep in you, I'd love for you to like this video and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, where are you watching from and what time is it there right now? Have you ever felt betrayed by someone you trusted with your whole heart? My name is Danielle Reed, and for most of my life I believed I understood what it meant to be a mother. I was born and raised in Columbus, Ohio. I never had a glamorous career, just a steady one. For over 30 years, I worked as a school secretary at a public middle school on the east side of town. It wasn't the kind of job people brag about, but it was honest, stable, and it allowed me to raise my son the best way I knew how. Ethan was my only child. His father left when Ethan was just 8 years old. No warning, no real explanation, just a suitcase and a silence that never quite filled back in. From that moment on, it was just the two of us. I became everything: mother, father, disciplinarian, cheerleader, and sometimes even his only friend. We didn't have much, but we had enough. I still remember nights when I'd stay up late balancing bills at the kitchen table, making sure Ethan never felt the weight of what we didn't have. I packed his lunches every morning, showed up to every school play, every soccer game, every parent-teacher conference. I told myself that if I gave him enough love, enough stability, enough support, he would grow into a good man. And for a long time, I truly believed he had. Ethan was kind as a boy, sensitive, the kind of child who would notice if I looked tired and offer to help without being asked. When he grew older, he worked part-time jobs, saved money, and even insisted on paying for small things once he started earning his own income. After college, he married young. Too young, if I'm being honest. The marriage didn't last. By the time he turned 30, it had already fallen apart. I remember the night he showed up at my condo, sitting on my couch with his face in his hands, telling me he felt like a failure, that he had messed everything up. I sat beside him just like I had when he was a child. I told him life doesn't end at 30. I told him people make mistakes and that what matters is what you do after. I told him he could come back home if he needed to. And for a while he did. Those were the years I felt closest to him. We would have dinner together almost every night. We'd watch old movies, talk about his future, his plans. He was open with me again, honest, in a way that only happens when someone is rebuilding themselves. That's why I didn't hesitate when he told me about Chloe. "She's different, Mom," he said one evening, smiling in a way I hadn't seen in years. "She's ambitious. She knows what she wants." I remember smiling back, wanting so badly for that to be true. The first time I met Chloe, she was polite, impeccably dressed, confident, and composed. She shook my hand firmly, looked me directly in the eye, and complimented my home. But there was something else there too. Something I couldn't quite name at the time, a kind of calculation. I ignored it, because I wanted Ethan to be happy. They got married less than a year later. At first, things seemed fine. Ethan called regularly, invited me over for dinners, and included me in their lives. But gradually, so gradually, I almost didn't notice it began to change. The calls became less frequent, the visits shorter. There was always a reason: work stress, deadlines, social obligations, Chloe's family events. And then one afternoon, Ethan came to see me with a look I recognized instantly, the same one he had worn years ago when his first marriage was falling apart. "Mom," he said, sitting across from me at my small dining table, "I need your help." He told me about his financial situation. Old debts from his previous marriage. Credit cards he had struggled to pay off. A credit score that made it nearly impossible to qualify for a mortgage on his own. "But Chloe found this house," he said. "It's perfect. Good neighborhood, close to everything. It's the kind of place we can build a real life in." I asked him what the bank had said. He hesitated. "They won't approve me on my own." I think part of me already knew what he was about to ask. "Mom, would you consider helping? Just for a little while, until I can get back on my feet." I didn't answer right away. Not because I didn't want to help, but because I understood what it meant. This wasn't just a loan, this was a risk, a big one. At that point, I had been living in my condo for nearly 15 years. It was fully paid off. It was modest, but it was mine. My security. my safety. But then I looked at my son, and I saw the same boy who used to sit at the kitchen table doing his homework while I made dinner. The same boy who once told me, "When I grow up, I'm going to take care of you, Mom." So I said yes. I sold my condo. Most of the money went toward helping Ethan secure the house. The rest I kept in savings, just enough to make sure I wouldn't become a burden later. But there was one condition. The house would be in my name. It wasn't about control, it was about protection. Ethan agreed immediately. "Of course, Mom," he said. "That makes total sense. It's temporary anyway. Once I fix my credit, we'll transfer it properly." Chloe agreed too, at least on the surface. She smiled, nodded, and said, "We really appreciate this, Danielle. It means everything." And for a while, it did feel like everything was working out. They moved into the house. It was beautiful. 2 stories, a wide front porch, a backyard big enough for summer barbecues, the kind of home I had always dreamed of giving my son. I visited often in the beginning. Ethan would show me around proudly, talking about future plans, renovations, holidays, maybe even children one day. But Chloe, she started making small comments. At first, they were subtle. Utilities are higher than we expected. Groceries have gotten so expensive lately. 3 adults in one house. It adds up. She would smile when she said these things, but her eyes didn't. I told myself not to overthink it, until one day Ethan stopped calling as often. Then he stopped visiting altogether. And when I did come over, something had shifted. The warmth was gone, replaced by something colder, something distant, something I didn't understand yet but would soon come to know far too well. Looking back now, I can see it clearly. That wasn't the moment things fell apart. That was the moment they began quietly rewriting the story, one where I was no longer the woman who made that house possible, but just someone living in it. I didn't move into Ethan and Chloe's house all at once. At first, it was just for a little while. That's how Ethan put it when I called to tell him about my knee surgery. The doctor had explained that recovery would take time, weeks, maybe months, and I wouldn't be able to manage stairs easily or move around without help. "Mom, you're not staying alone like that," Ethan said immediately. "Just come stay with us. The basement's finished, it'll be perfect. You'll have your own space." There was no hesitation in his voice. No annoyance. No reluctance. Just concern. And I believed it. The basement apartment was in fact lovely. Ethan had put effort into finishing it years earlier, before Chloe came into the picture. It had a small kitchenette, a bathroom, even a separate sitting area with a window that let in just enough daylight to keep it from feeling closed in. For the first couple of weeks, things felt almost normal. Ethan checked on me every morning before work. "Do you need anything, Mom? Did you take your medication? Call me if you feel dizzy, okay?" He'd bring groceries down, sometimes even sit for a few minutes and talk about work, about the house, about life. It reminded me of those years after his divorce, when we had rebuilt something fragile but real between us. Chloe, too, was polite. She would knock before coming downstairs, ask if I needed tea, occasionally bring a plate of whatever she had cooked upstairs. "Just making sure you're okay, Danielle," she'd say, smiling that same composed smile. But even then, there was something about it that didn't feel like warmth. It felt measured, like she was performing kindness rather than feeling it. Still, I told myself I was imagining things. I had always been careful not to become that mother, the one who interferes, who criticizes, who creates tension in her son's marriage. I stayed in my space. I kept my opinions to myself. I tried to be easy, grateful, invisible if necessary. But slowly, almost imperceptibly, things began to change. It started with small comments. One evening, Chloe came downstairs while I was making tea. "You know," she said, casually leaning against the counter, "the electricity bill has been unusually high lately." I looked at her, unsure how to respond. "I suppose winter's coming early," I said. She nodded, but her eyes lingered on the kettle, the lights, the small heater I had turned on to keep the chill away from my joints. "Yeah," she said. "I guess when more people are in the house, it adds up." The words were light, but the meaning wasn't. After that, the comments became more frequent. Groceries, water usage, internet speed, always framed as observations, never accusations, but always directed at me. Ethan never said anything outright, but he stopped correcting her too. That was new. Then came the subtle shifts in behavior. One afternoon, I came upstairs to find that my favorite chair, the one by the living room window where I liked to sit and read, was gone. In its place was a decorative accent chair that looked beautiful but felt like sitting on wood. "Oh, we just moved it to the garage," Chloe said when I asked. It didn't really match the aesthetic. The aesthetic? I nodded even though something inside me tightened. Another day I went to the kitchen to get my medication organizer, only to find it had been moved. I found it later in a cabinet I never used. "I thought it would be safer out of the way," Chloe explained. "So no one knocks it over." No one. Or just me. I began to notice something else too. Conversations would stop when I entered a room. Voices would lower. Doors would close just a little too quickly. Once I walked into the kitchen and saw Chloe standing by the counter flipping through a stack of papers. She startled when she saw me quickly gathering them. "Oh, just bills," she said too quickly. I didn't ask, but I remembered. Then there was the mail. At first, I thought it was just the usual mix-ups that happen when multiple people share an address, a letter or two missing, a delay here and there. But then it happened again, and again. Important mail, bank statements, a notice from my insurance provider that arrived days late. When I asked Ethan about it, he shrugged. "Probably just the postal service messing up, Mom." It happens. Maybe it does. But not that often. Not that consistently. And not only to one person. The moment that truly unsettled me came on a quiet Tuesday afternoon. Chloe came downstairs without knocking. That in itself was unusual. She stood near the bottom of the stairs watching me as I folded laundry. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Of course," I replied. She hesitated just long enough to make it feel intentional. "Do you still handle all your own paperwork?" I paused. "What do you mean?" "Well," she said, stepping a little closer. "Things like your banking, your insurance, legal documents, all that." I folded the shirt in my hand slowly. "Yes," I said. "Why wouldn't I?" she smiled. "Oh, no reason. I just know it can get overwhelming for some people as they get older. Sometimes it helps to have support. Support." There it was again, that careful wording, that polite tone hiding something sharper underneath. "I manage just fine," I said, keeping my voice even. "Of course you do," she replied quickly. I didn't mean anything by it. But she did. We both knew she did. After she left, I sat there for a long time staring at the neatly folded clothes in my lap. Something wasn't right. This wasn't just about space, or bills, or even control of the household. This felt deliberate, targeted. That night, after everyone had gone to bed, I locked my basement door and took out the small pouch I kept hidden at the back of my closet. Inside were the documents that mattered most. The deed, the purchase records, the bank transfers, the proof of everything I had done to make that house possible. My hands trembled slightly as I went through them, not because I was unsure of what I'd find, but because for the first time I was afraid of why I felt the need to check. Everything was still there, untouched, exactly as it should be. I let out a slow breath, but the relief didn't last. Because as I sat there, surrounded by papers that proved the truth, I realized something far more unsettling. The problem wasn't whether the documents were safe. The problem was that somehow I no longer felt safe in my own home. And deep down, I was beginning to suspect that what Ethan and Chloe wanted from me wasn't just patience, or space, or even money. They wanted control, and they were willing to take it one quiet step at a time. If there is one thing I have learned in my lifetime, it is this: cruelty rarely arrives all at once. It comes quietly, softly, in ways that can be explained away until one day you realize it has been building for a long time and you are already standing in the middle of it. That is exactly what happened in Ethan's house. Or rather, in my house. At first I kept telling myself I was imagining things, that I was being overly sensitive, that maybe this was just what it felt like to get older in someone else's space, to notice changes more, to feel less in control. But then the pattern became impossible to ignore. It wasn't just Chloe anymore. Ethan had started to change in ways that cut far deeper. One Sunday afternoon, we had a small gathering at the house. A few of their friends, a couple from the neighborhood, and some of Chloe's relatives were there. I had stayed mostly downstairs, not wanting to intrude, but Ethan had come down and insisted I join them. "Come on, Mom," he said. "You shouldn't isolate yourself." So I went upstairs. I even made an effort. I wore one of my nicer sweaters, brushed my hair carefully, and brought a dessert I had prepared myself, a peach cobbler recipe I had perfected over decades. When I entered the living room, conversations paused briefly, then resumed. Chloe greeted me with a smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Oh, Danielle made something," she announced lightly, as if introducing a small curiosity. I set the dish down on the table. "I hope everyone likes it," I said. A woman I didn't recognize nodded politely. "It looks lovely." We all sat down. For a while, everything seemed normal. People talked about work, about travel, about the rising cost of housing. I listened quietly, adding a comment here and there when it felt appropriate. Then the conversation shifted. Someone mentioned mortgages, interest rates, refinancing options, and that's when Chloe spoke. "Well," she said with a soft laugh, "we've had to carry a bit more than expected lately." I felt something tighten in my chest. "What do you mean?" one of her relatives asked. Chloe waved her hand casually. "Oh, just family responsibilities. You know how it is." Her eyes flicked toward me just for a second, then she smiled again. "Ethan's been amazing, though, really stepping up." I turned to look at my son. He didn't correct her. He didn't say a word. Instead, he gave a small, almost embarrassed smile and took a sip of his drink. And just like that, a lie became the truth in the room. Ethan, carrying me. After everything I had sacrificed, I felt heat rise to my face. "That's not exactly," I began. But Ethan cut in, his tone light but firm. "Mom, it's fine," he said. "You don't have to explain everything." "Explain what?" "The truth." The words died in my throat. The conversation moved on, but something inside me didn't. Later that evening, after the guests had left, I stood in the kitchen alone, rinsing dishes. My hands moved automatically, but my mind was elsewhere, replaying that moment over and over again. Ethan walked in behind me. "You didn't have to say anything back there," he said. I turned slowly. "Say anything," I repeated. He sighed as if I were being difficult. "About the house, about money. It just makes things awkward." I stared at him. "Awkward," I said quietly. "Ethan, she made it sound like you're supporting me." He shrugged. "It's not that big of a deal, Mom. Not that big of a deal." The phrase echoed in my ears. "You know that's not true," I said. "You know Mom," he interrupted, his voice sharper now. "Why does it matter how it sounds to other people? Why does it matter?" I felt something inside me crack, not loudly, not dramatically, but in a way that changed everything. "It matters because it's not the truth," I said. He ran a hand through his hair, clearly irritated. "Look, we're trying to build something here. A certain image, stability, respect. And constantly bringing up technicalities about ownership or finances, it just complicates things." Technicalities. That's what he called it. The home I had sold my life for. The security I had given up. The trust I had placed in him. All of it. Reduced to a technicality. I didn't respond. I couldn't. Because in that moment I realized something that frightened me more than anything Chloe had said or done. Ethan didn't just tolerate the narrative. He needed it. Over the next few weeks, the behavior escalated. Subtly, but unmistakably. Chloe began correcting me in front of others. "Oh, Danielle, you already told that story. Are you sure that's how it happened? Maybe you're remembering it a little differently." At first I thought she was joking. Then I noticed the looks people gave me afterward. Polite, but questioning. One afternoon I overheard Chloe speaking to a neighbor near the front yard. "She's been a little forgetful lately," Chloe said in a concerned tone. "We're keeping an eye on her." I froze where I stood. Forgetful, I had never been more clear-minded in my life. That night I went back downstairs and sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the wall. The pieces were starting to come together. The comments, the subtle corrections, the narrative they were building. This wasn't just about control of the house. This was about control of perception. If they could make others believe I was confused, unreliable, declining, then anything I said about the house, about the money, about the truth could be dismissed, neutralized. I stood up slowly and walked to my closet. From the back, I pulled out the pouch again. The deed, the financial records, the proof. I laid everything out carefully on the bed. My hands were steady now, because for the first time I wasn't just reacting, I was understanding. And understanding changes everything. They weren't just trying to push me out, they were trying to erase me, to turn me into someone whose voice no longer mattered, someone who could be managed, controlled, perhaps even legally declared incapable. I had seen it happen before. Not to me, but to others. Women my age, widows, mothers who trusted too much, who signed things they didn't fully understand, who were told it was for their own good, and by the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. I sat there for a long time looking at those documents. Then I did something I hadn't done before. I made copies, every page, every signature, every detail. Not because I doubted their authenticity, but because deep down, I was beginning to understand that this situation might not stay within the walls of that house. It might become something else, something legal, something irreversible. And if that day came, I would not be the woman they were trying to turn me into. Confused, helpless, silent. No, I would be prepared. Because one thing they had clearly forgotten was that I had spent my entire life surviving. And I wasn't about to stop now. The first time Ethan asked me to sign the papers, he did it casually. Too casually. It was a Thursday afternoon. I had just come upstairs to make myself a cup of tea when I found a neat stack of documents laid out on the kitchen island. Ethan stood beside them, one hand resting lightly on the counter, the other holding a pen. "Hey, Mom," he said, his tone almost cheerful. Perfect timing. I looked at the papers, then at him. "What's this?" "Nothing complicated," he replied quickly. "Just some refinancing paperwork. We've been looking into getting a better rate on the house. It'll lower the monthly payments, help everyone out. Everyone." That word again. I stepped closer, glancing at the top page. The language was dense, legal, far more complex than anything I would have expected for a simple rate adjustment. "I didn't know you were refinancing," I said. Chloe appeared beside him as if on cue. "We didn't want to stress you with it," she said smoothly. "But it's actually a really good opportunity. Timing is everything with these things." She smiled, but her eyes were watching me carefully, measuring, waiting. Ethan slid the pen a little closer. "If you could just sign here," he said, tapping the bottom of the page, "we can get the process moving today." Something about the moment felt rehearsed, too polished, too urgent. I didn't pick up the pen. "I'd like to read through it first," I said. Ethan's smile faltered just for a second. "Mom, it's standard stuff," he said. "It's nothing you need to worry about." "I'm not worried," I replied calmly. "I just don't sign documents without reading them." Chloe let out a soft laugh. "That's fair," she said, though there was a hint of impatience in her voice. "But it's really just routine. We already had someone look it over." "Who?" I asked. She hesitated. "A contact of Jason's," she said finally. Jason. Her brother. The same brother who, from what little I knew, jumped from one business idea to another, none of them particularly successful. "I'll still take my time," I said. Ethan exhaled sharply. "Mom, we're on a timeline here," he said. "Rates change. If we miss this window, it could cost us. Cost us. Not cost him, not cost them. Cost us." The pressure was subtle but unmistakable. I looked down at the documents again, then back at my son. "I'll review them tonight," I said, "and I'll let you know." The silence that followed was heavy. Chloe's smile tightened. Ethan picked up the pen and set it down again, clearly frustrated. "Fine," he said. "Just don't take too long." I nodded. But something inside me had already shifted. That night, I locked my basement door and spread the documents out on my small dining table. I read every page. Slowly. Carefully. Twice. And what I found made my stomach turn. It wasn't just refinancing paperwork. Buried within the pages, hidden beneath layers of standard legal language, were clauses that went far beyond adjusting an interest rate. There were provisions that would allow a transfer of ownership under certain conditions, language granting broad financial authority. Terms that, if signed without scrutiny, could have given Ethan control not just over the house, but potentially over my finances as well. I sat back in my chair, my heart pounding. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't poor communication. This was intentional, deliberate, calculated. My own son had placed those papers in front of me knowing, or at least not caring, that they could strip me of everything I still controlled. For a long time, I just sat there staring at the pages, trying to reconcile the man I was seeing with the boy I had raised. They didn't match. They couldn't. And yet, here we were. I reached for my phone and opened the camera. Carefully, I took photos of every page, every clause, every signature line. Then I placed the documents back into their original order exactly as I had found them. The next morning I called Lydia. "I need your help," I told her. There was no hesitation in her response. "Of course," she said. "What's going on?" I didn't go into full detail over the phone. Instead, I asked if we could meet. We sat together that afternoon at a small cafe not far from the church. I brought the photos with me, my hands steady but my chest still tight with the weight of what I had discovered. Lydia listened quietly as I explained everything. She didn't interrupt, didn't rush me, and when I finished, she leaned back in her chair, her expression serious. "I want you to show these to someone I trust," she said. "Who?" my niece Lydia replied. "She works as a paralegal. She deals with contracts like this all the time." I nodded. That evening, Lydia arranged for her niece to review the documents. The call came the next day. I will never forget the tone of her voice. "Danielle," she said carefully, "you were right not to sign anything." I closed my eyes briefly. "I thought so," I said. "This isn't just refinancing," she continued. "There are multiple clauses here that could allow for a transfer of ownership under certain conditions. And this section," she paused, "this could be interpreted as granting power over financial decisions if challenged." A cold chill ran through me. "So if I had signed, you could have lost control of the property," she said plainly. "Possibly more." The words settled heavily in the air. Lost control of everything I had worked for, everything I had protected, everything I had trusted my son with. "Thank you," I said quietly. After the call ended, I sat alone in my basement. The house was silent, but my thoughts were anything but. There is a particular kind of pain that comes from betrayal, not loud, not explosive, but deep, quiet. The kind that changes how you see everything that came before. I thought about Ethan standing in the kitchen, pen in hand, his voice calm, his expression expectant, asking me to sign, not explaining, not warning, just expecting obedience. I pressed my hands together, steadying myself, because the truth was now undeniable. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't influence. This wasn't just Chloe. Ethan had been part of this. Whether fully or partially, he had stood there and asked me to give up control of my own life. And that meant something else. Something even harder to accept. I could no longer assume that he would stop. If anything, this was just the beginning. And for the first time since all of this started, I understood something clearly. If I didn't protect myself now, there might not be anything left to protect later. The morning after I spoke with Lydia's niece, I didn't wait. I didn't confront Ethan. I didn't argue. I didn't explain. Instead, I did something far more important. I called a lawyer. His name was Mark Sullivan. Lydia had recommended him without hesitation. "He's the kind of man who listens before he speaks," she said. "And when he does speak, it matters." We met 2 days later at his office in downtown Columbus. I remember sitting in the waiting room, my hands folded tightly in my lap, trying to steady the quiet storm inside me. It wasn't just fear I was feeling, it was something deeper. A shift. A realization that I was no longer dealing with a misunderstanding, but with a situation that could take everything from me if I handled it wrong. "Mrs. Reed," I looked up. Mark Sullivan stood in the doorway, tall, composed with a calm expression that immediately put me at ease. "Please come in." His office was simple but orderly. Bookshelves lined one wall filled with legal volumes. A large wooden desk sat near the window, sunlight cutting across its surface in clean, sharp lines. "Tell me everything," he said once we were seated. And I did. I told him about Ethan, about Chloe, about the house, the documents, the pressure, the subtle attempts to make me seem forgetful. He didn't interrupt. He didn't react immediately. He just listened, carefully. When I finished, I handed him the printed copies of the documents. He adjusted his glasses and began to read. Minutes passed, then more. The room felt impossibly quiet. Finally, he set the papers down and looked at me. "You were right not to sign these," he said. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I was holding. "I thought so," I replied. "This isn't standard refinancing," he continued. "There are clauses here that could absolutely be used to transfer ownership. And this section," he tapped one of the pages, "this is dangerously close to granting decision-making authority if someone were to challenge your capacity." My chest tightened. "So I'm not overreacting," I said. "No," he replied firmly. "You're not." The clarity in his voice did something for me. It anchored me. Because for weeks I had been questioning myself, wondering if I was imagining things, if I was becoming paranoid, if I was in fact becoming the very thing they were subtly suggesting I was. But I wasn't. And now I knew it. The house, he continued, is fully in your name. Based on what you've shown me, there is no ambiguity. You are the legal owner. I nodded slowly. And they can't take it, I asked. Not without your consent, he said. Then he paused. But that doesn't mean they won't try to create a situation where your consent can be challenged. That sentence lingered. Challenged. They've already started, I said quietly. The comments, the way they talk about me to others, suggesting I'm forgetful. Mark leaned back in his chair, his expression thoughtful. That's a common tactic, he said. If they can establish a narrative that you're mentally declining, they may attempt to position themselves as necessary decision makers. My stomach dropped. So they could, declare me unfit? They could try, he said. It wouldn't be easy and it wouldn't happen overnight. But if enough doubt is created, especially if combined with signed documents, it could become complicated. Complicated. That word again. It seemed everything in my life was being reduced to something manageable, something explainable, something that could be twisted just enough to serve someone else's purpose. What do I do? I asked. Mark didn't answer immediately. Instead, he folded his hands together on the desk. You prepare, he said. The simplicity of the word struck me. Prepare how? We start by protecting everything that's already yours, he said. You make copies of all critical documents which you've already done. Good. We place originals in a secure location. A safe deposit box, ideally. I nodded. We review your financial accounts, he continued. Make sure no one else has access. No joint control unless absolutely necessary. I've kept everything separate, I said. Good, he replied. Keep it that way. He reached for a notepad and began writing. We also update your will, he said, and any healthcare directives. Make your intentions clear, legally binding, and difficult to contest. The word contest sent a chill through me. And my living situation, I asked? I'm still in the house. He looked at me carefully. For now, he said, you do not confront them. Not yet. I frowned slightly. Why not? Because right now, he said, they believe they have the upper hand. They believe you're unaware. That gives you an advantage. An advantage? I hadn't thought of it that way. If you confront them too early, he continued, they may escalate, move faster, become more aggressive. It's better to understand the full scope of their intentions first. I sat back, absorbing his words. For the first time in weeks, I didn't feel like I was being pushed. I felt like I was standing still, grounded, thinking. And if they try something again, I asked. They will, he said simply. There was no hesitation, no doubt. They've already taken the first step, he added. People don't usually stop there. A quiet silence filled the room. Then he leaned forward slightly. Mrs. Reed, he said, his tone steady. You need to understand something. This isn't just about property. This is about control. And once someone decides they're entitled to control something that isn't theirs, they rarely give up easily. Entitled. The word echoed in my mind because it fit. It fit Ethan's tone, his attitude, the way he had stood in that kitchen, pen in hand, expecting me to sign without question. Then I won't make it easy, I said. Mark gave a small nod. That's exactly the right approach. When I left his office, the air outside felt different. Colder, perhaps. Or maybe I was just more aware of it. I walked slowly down the sidewalk, my thoughts clearer than they had been in weeks. I wasn't imagining things. I wasn't overreacting. And I wasn't powerless. But I also wasn't safe. Not in the way I had once believed. That realization stayed with me as I returned to the house that afternoon. Everything looked the same. The front porch, the windows, the quiet street. But I saw it differently now. Not as a home I had given my son, but as something I needed to protect from him. When I stepped inside, Chloe was in the kitchen. She glanced at me briefly. Out running errands, she asked. Yes, I replied. She nodded, then returned to her phone. No warmth. No curiosity. Just indifference. Ethan came home later that evening. He barely acknowledged me. Just a quick, "Hey, Mom," as he passed by. As if nothing had happened. As if everything was normal. But it wasn't. Not anymore. Because now I understood the rules of the situation I was in, and more importantly, I understood that if I didn't take control of it soon, they would. After meeting with Mark Sullivan, I began to see everything differently. Not just what Ethan and Chloe said, but how they said it. The pauses, the looks, the timing. It was as if a veil had been lifted, and suddenly every interaction carried a second meaning beneath the surface. I became quieter, more observant, more careful. I followed Mark's advice exactly. I didn't confront them. I didn't reveal what I knew. I simply watched and prepared. And the more I watched, the more I realized how far things had already gone. It happened on a Wednesday afternoon. I had come upstairs earlier than usual to refill my water pitcher. The house was quiet, which wasn't unusual. Ethan was supposed to be at work, and Chloe often spent her afternoons on calls or running errands. But as I reached the top of the stairs, I heard voices. Sharp, tense, coming from the kitchen. I paused. Something in the tone made me stop. I wasn't trying to eavesdrop, at least not at first. But then I heard my name. "This is taking too long, Ethan." Chloe's voice, low but edged with frustration. I stayed where I was, just out of sight, my hand resting lightly against the wall. Ethan responded, his voice quieter. "I know. I'm working on it." "No, you're not," Chloe snapped. "You're hesitating." There was a brief silence. Then Ethan exhaled. "She's my mother, Chloe." And she shot back immediately. "That doesn't change what we need." Need. That word again. My chest tightened. "We can't keep living like this," Chloe continued. "We're stuck. Everything is tied up in that house." That house. I closed my eyes for a moment. "Once the paperwork goes through," she added, "we can finally move forward. Pay off the credit cards. Get ahead. Jason already said he can double what we invest if we move quickly." Jason. Of course. Ethan didn't respond right away. When he finally spoke, his voice was different. Not defensive, not reluctant, but conflicted. "I just don't want to rush it," he said. "If she gets suspicious, she already is," Chloe interrupted. "You think she doesn't notice things? She's not stupid." A strange, bitter irony settled in my chest. Not stupid, and yet they had been treating me as if I were. "Then what do you want me to do?" Ethan asked. There was a pause, and when Chloe spoke again, her voice was colder. "You push harder." My fingers tightened slightly against the wall. "Ethan, listen to me," she continued. "You've done everything for her. Everything. You let her move in, you take care of her, you handle the house." "That's not exactly," Ethan began. "It is exactly," she cut in. "And honestly, you deserve something in return." Deserve. The word echoed loudly in my mind. "She was never going to keep the house forever," Chloe went on. "So why are we waiting around like we need permission?" I could hear my own heartbeat now. Loud, steady, unforgiving. Ethan sighed. "It's not that simple." "It is," Chloe said firmly. "You just don't want to admit it." Another silence. Then quietly, almost too quietly, Ethan said something that changed everything. "I've earned this." The words landed like a blow, not raised in anger, not shouted, but spoken with quiet conviction, as if he truly believed it. As if everything I had done for him had somehow turned into something he felt entitled to. My throat tightened. I leaned back slightly, needing something solid behind me. "Then act like it," Chloe said. "Because if we don't move now, we're going to lose everything." Lose everything. The irony was almost unbearable. "You heard what Jason said," she continued. "This is our chance. But we need the equity. We need control of the property. Without that, we're stuck." Stuck. I swallowed hard. Because suddenly the picture was clear. This wasn't just about the house. It was about what the house could give them. Money, leverage, opportunity. And I was the only thing standing in the way. "I'll talk to her again," Ethan said finally. His voice was resigned, but not resistant. "Good," Chloe replied, "because we don't have time for this to drag out. Footsteps, chairs moving." The conversation was ending. I stepped quietly back down the stairs before they could see me, my mind racing, my chest tight with something I couldn't fully name. Not just pain, not just betrayal, something deeper, a kind of final clarity. I sat on the edge of my bed, my hands resting in my lap. For a long time, I didn't move. I just stared at the floor, replaying his words. "I've earned this. Earned what? The house, my trust, my sacrifices. Had I somehow raised him to believe that love came with a return policy, that care was an investment he was entitled to collect on later? I thought back to all the years I had given him. The nights I stayed awake worrying, the days I worked double shifts, the choices I made over and over again putting him first. None of it had felt like something he owed me for, because that's not what motherhood is. But somewhere along the way, he had decided otherwise. I stood up slowly and walked to my closet. I pulled out the pouch again, the documents, the proof, the truth. And this time, as I looked at them, I didn't feel fear. I felt resolve. Because now there was no more doubt, no more hesitation, no more second guessing. Ethan wasn't being manipulated. He wasn't confused. He wasn't caught in something he didn't understand. He was choosing this, choosing control, choosing entitlement, choosing something over me. And that meant something else too. It meant I could no longer protect him from the consequences of that choice. Upstairs I heard footsteps, normal sounds, the rhythm of a house that from the outside probably looked just like any other. But I knew better now, because beneath that normalcy, there was something else. Something quiet, something calculated, something that had been building for weeks, maybe months. And now, it had a direction, a plan, a deadline. And so did I. Because whatever they thought was going to happen next, they were about to find out I wasn't the woman they believed I was. The night it happened, the air had already turned sharp long before the rain began. It was one of those early winter evenings in Ohio where the cold doesn't just settle around you, it seeps into your bones. The sky had been heavy all afternoon, low and gray, like it was waiting for something to break. So was the house. Dinner that night started like any other, quiet, measured, careful. I had come upstairs a little earlier than usual. Not because I wanted to, but because I was tired of hiding in my own home. I set the table even though Chloe preferred doing things her way. I thought maybe, just maybe, a normal gesture could soften whatever tension had been growing between us. Ethan noticed. "Thanks, Mom," he said, though his tone was distracted. Chloe glanced at the table, then at me. "You didn't have to do that," she said lightly. "I wanted to," I replied. She gave a small nod, but something in her expression tightened. We sat down. For a few minutes there was nothing but the sound of utensils against plates. Then Chloe spoke. "We need to talk." Ethan didn't look up. I set my fork down slowly, about what I asked. She didn't answer me directly. Instead, she turned to Ethan. "You should say it." My chest tightened. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders stiff. "Mom, we've been thinking," he began. Thinking. That word carried weight now. "A lot has changed," he continued. "And it might be better if we made some adjustments." "What kind of adjustments?" I asked quietly. He hesitated. Chloe didn't. "This situation isn't working anymore," she said plainly. The room seemed to grow colder. "I'm not sure I understand," I replied. Chloe leaned forward slightly, her eyes steady on mine. "You living here," she said. "It's creating tension, financial strain, stress. I felt a slow, steady heat rise in my chest. "This is my home," I said. The words came out calm, but they carried something underneath. Chloe smiled faintly. "Let's not make this about technicalities," she said. Technicalities, that word again. Ethan shifted uncomfortably in his chair. "Mom, we just think it might be good for everyone if you stayed somewhere else for a while," he said. "For how long?" I asked. "Just temporarily," he replied. Temporary. Everything was always temporary until it wasn't. I looked at him carefully. "And where exactly do you expect me to go?" I asked. Chloe answered before he could. "There are plenty of options," she said. "Short-term rentals, senior communities, places that are better equipped." "I'm not leaving my house," I said. The silence that followed was immediate, sharp, final. Chloe's expression hardened. Ethan's jaw tightened. "I'm not asking," Chloe said quietly. And there it was. No more softness, no more performance. Just truth. I felt something inside me settle. Not fear, not anger. Something steadier. "I'm not going anywhere," I repeated. Ethan pushed his chair back slightly, frustration flashing across his face. "Mom, why are you making this so difficult?" he said. "Difficult? I almost laughed. "I'm making this difficult," I asked. "Ethan, you're asking me to leave the home that—" "Psst, this is what I mean," he interrupted. "You keep bringing that up like it's some kind of leverage." "Leverage." The word hit me harder than I expected. "It's not leverage," I said. "It's the truth." Chloe stood up. Abruptly. "I can't keep doing this," she said. "This constant tension, this refusal to be reasonable." Reasonable. The rain began then. Soft at first, tapping lightly against the windows. Ethan stood up too. "Maybe you just need some space," he said. "I don't need space," I replied. He ran a hand through his hair, pacing once across the room. "Mom, please," he said. "Just for a few days. Let things cool down." And then what I asked, he didn't answer. Because we both knew. A few days would become a week. A week would become permanent. This wasn't about space. This was about removal. "I'm not leaving," I said again. The rain grew heavier. Louder. Chloe crossed her arms. "Then we'll have to make other arrangements," she said. Something in her tone sent a chill down my spine. "What does that mean?" I asked. Ethan didn't look at me. "That means this situation can't continue," he said. Before I could respond, Chloe moved toward the hallway. Moments later, she returned with my overnight bag. I froze. "What are you doing?" I asked. She set it down by the door. "You said you weren't leaving," she said. "So we're helping." Helping. The word felt twisted. "Ethan," I said, my voice low, steady. "Tell her to stop." He didn't move. Didn't speak. Didn't even meet my eyes. Something inside me broke then. Not loudly. Not visibly. But completely. I walked toward the door slowly, picked up the bag. My hands were steady. My heart was not. "This is a mistake," I said quietly. Chloe didn't respond. Ethan finally looked at me, but only briefly. "Just go for a few days," he muttered. The rain was pouring now. Heavy. Relentless. I opened the door. Cold air hit me instantly. Sharp. Biting. I stepped outside. Barefoot. The wooden porch slick beneath my feet. For a moment I thought, surely this is where it stops. Surely he will call me back. Surely he will realize what he's doing. I turned slightly. "Ethan." The door shut. The sound was final. I stared at it. At the glass. At the faint reflection of myself, small, soaked, standing alone. Then I heard it. The click. The lock. A sound I would never forget. Inside I saw movement. Chloe walking past the hallway. Ethan standing still. Just for a second. Then turning away. And just like that, I was no longer part of the home I had built. The rain soaked through my robe, my hair, my skin. The cold wrapped around me unforgiving, but it wasn't the cold that hurt the most. It was the silence, the absence, the realization that the child I had raised had just chosen to close a door on me. Across the street, a porch light flickered on. A shadow moved behind the window. Someone had seen. But in that moment, I didn't move. I didn't knock. I didn't beg. I just stood there. In the freezing rain. On the porch of a house that was legally mine. And emotionally, no longer home. I don't remember how long I stood there. Time doesn't move the same way when your world shifts beneath your feet. Seconds stretch. Thoughts blur. The cold becomes something distant, almost unreal, until it suddenly isn't. The rain soaked through everything. My robe clung to my skin, heavy and useless against the wind. My feet were numb against the wooden porch, the chill creeping upward, slow but relentless. My fingers trembled not just from the cold, but from something deeper, something harder to name. Shock. Not the kind that makes you scream, the kind that leaves you quiet, still, trying to understand something that no longer makes sense. I kept looking at the door, waiting. For what I don't know. For Ethan to open it again. For him to realize what he had done, for him to remember who I was. But the door stayed closed, the curtains remained drawn, and my house stood silent. Then I heard it, a door opening across the street. "Danielle," I turned slowly. "Mrs." Parker stood on her porch, wrapped in a thick coat, her gray hair pulled back, her face etched with concern. "Oh my goodness, what are you doing out here?" Her voice broke through the fog in my mind. I'm fine," I said automatically. The lie came easily. Too easily. She didn't believe me. Of course she didn't. "No, you are not," she said firmly. "Come here. Right now." I hesitated. Not because I didn't want to go, but because something inside me still resisted the idea that I had been cast out, that I needed help, that I had nowhere else to go. "Danielle," she said again more urgently, "you're going to get sick. Come inside." The rain intensified as if to push me forward, and finally, I moved. Each step across the driveway felt heavier than the last, not physically, emotionally, like I was crossing a line I could never uncross. Mrs. Parker met me halfway, wrapping an arm around my shoulders, guiding me gently but firmly toward her home. "You're freezing," she muttered. Inside, the warmth hit me immediately, sharp, overwhelming. My body reacted before my mind could catch up, shivering violently now that I was out of the cold. "Sit down," she said, leading me to a chair. "I'll get you a blanket." I sat, hands in my lap, still shaking, still silent. She returned quickly, draping a thick blanket around me, then disappeared again, only to come back with a towel and a steaming mug. "Drink this," she said, placing it carefully in my hands. "It's just tea, but it'll help." I nodded. Tried to speak, but no words came. For a few minutes there was only the sound of rain against her windows. Then gently, "What happened?" she asked. I stared down at the tea, at the faint steam rising from its surface, and for a moment I considered lying again, saying it was a misunderstanding, that I had stepped out for air, that everything was fine. But the truth was already sitting in the room with us, unavoidable. "He locked me out," I said quietly. The words felt foreign, like they belonged to someone else. Mrs. Parker's expression hardened. "Ethan did that?" she asked. I nodded. "And Chloe?" she pressed. "They both did," I replied. Silence. Heavy. Disbelieving. "That's not right," she said finally. "That's not just a family disagreement. That's—" She stopped herself, but she didn't need to finish. We both knew. She reached for the phone on the counter. "I'm calling someone," she said. I looked up quickly. "No," I said. She paused. "Danielle, this isn't something you just—" "I know," I interrupted softly. "I know what it is." She hesitated, then slowly set the phone down. "Then what do you want to do?" she asked. I thought about it, about the door, the lock, Ethan turning away, and something inside me shifted. "I need to make a call," I said. "To who? My lawyer?" The word felt strange on my tongue. New, but necessary. "Mrs. Parker nodded immediately. "Of course." She handed me the phone. My fingers trembled slightly as I dialed Mark's number. It rang once, twice. Then he answered. "Mark Sullivan." "It's Danielle Reed," I said. There was no hesitation in his response. "Mrs. Reed, are you all right?" I took a breath. "No," I said. "I'm not." I explained everything. The argument, the bag, the door, the lock. He didn't interrupt, didn't question, and when I finished, his voice was calm but firm. "Where are you right now?" he asked. "At my neighbor's house. Across the street." "Good," he said. "Stay there tonight. Do not go back." I glanced toward the window. Toward the house. "I wasn't planning to," I said. "Good," he repeated. "What they did, locking you out, that's important." Important. The word caught my attention. "How?" I asked. "It establishes behavior," he said. "It shows intent. It shows escalation." I nodded slowly, even though he couldn't see me. "They've also already started building a narrative about your mental state," he continued. "Have they contacted anyone? Said anything?" I thought back. To Chloe's comments. To the neighbor she spoke to. To the subtle suggestions. "Yes," I said. "They've been telling people I'm forgetful." Mark exhaled softly. "That's consistent," he said. "Then we move quickly." "What happens now?" I asked. "Tomorrow morning," he said, "I'll draft a formal notice establishing your ownership and demanding immediate access to the property." Demanding. The word felt powerful, unfamiliar. "They won't expect that," he added, "which is exactly why we act now." I looked down at my hands, still trembling but less, because now there was direction. "There's something else," I said. "What is it?" "I don't have my phone. It's inside." A pause. "That's all right," he said. "We'll document everything. For now, stay where you are. Rest. You've done enough for one night." Done enough. I almost smiled. If only he knew. After the call ended, I handed the phone back to Mrs. Parker. Well, she asked. He's handling it, I said. She nodded. Good. There was another moment of silence. Then she said something I didn't expect. I saw it, you know. I looked up. Saw what you, she said. On the porch, when he closed the door. My chest tightened. There's a camera across the street, she added. The Hendersons installed it last year. It points right toward your house. My breath caught. You're saying... I'm saying, she replied gently, you weren't invisible tonight. The words settled into something deep inside me, because for the first time since the door had closed, I realized something important. They might try to rewrite the story, to make me seem confused, unstable, unreliable. But the truth had been seen, and now it could be proven. I pulled the blanket tighter around me, the warmth finally reaching somewhere deeper than my skin. Because the night hadn't ended the way they expected. They thought they had pushed me out, silenced me, removed me. But what they had really done was cross a line they couldn't step back from. And in doing so, they had just given me exactly what I needed. The next morning felt unreal. I woke up in Mrs. Parker's guest room wrapped in blankets that smelled faintly of lavender and laundry detergent, staring at a ceiling I didn't recognize. For a moment I forgot where I was. Then it all came back. The rain, the door, the lock, Ethan. I sat up slowly, my body still sore from the cold, but it wasn't the physical discomfort that lingered. It was the weight in my chest, the quiet understanding that something fundamental had shifted and there was no going back. Mrs. Parker knocked gently before entering. I made some breakfast, she said softly. You should eat something. I will, I replied, though I wasn't sure I could. She studied my face for a moment, then gave a small nod. You look stronger today, she said. Stronger. I wasn't sure if that was true, but I was clearer, and sometimes clarity looks a lot like strength. By the time I joined her in the kitchen, my phone situation had already been resolved. Mark had arranged for a temporary line, and I was able to speak with him again mid-morning. I've prepared the documents, he said. We're moving forward today. What exactly does that mean? I asked. It means we're going to remind them formally and legally who owns that house, he replied. There was no hesitation in his voice. No doubt. Ethan reached out to you, I asked. Yes, he said. He left a message early this morning. Sounded agitated. That didn't surprise me. What did he say? That you were overreacting, Mark replied calmly. That it was a misunderstanding. That he was trying to take care of you. I let out a slow breath. Of course he said that. They always do, Mark added quietly. A chill ran through me, not from fear, but from recognition. This wasn't new. Not to him, not to the system, just to me. What happens now? I asked. I've scheduled a meeting, he said. Today, at my office. I told him it would be best to resolve everything face to face. And he agreed reluctantly, Mark said. But yes, I closed my eyes briefly. Today. It was happening today. Good, I said. There was a pause. Danielle, he added, his tone softening slightly. I want you to be prepared. This won't be easy. They may try to shift the narrative, minimize what happened, even turn it back on you. I understand, I said. Do you? He asked gently. I thought about the past few weeks, the comments, the lies, the way Ethan had stood in that kitchen pen in hand, the way he had turned away at the door. Yes, I said. I do. By the time we arrived at Mark's office, I felt something settle inside me. Not calm, but control. The receptionist greeted us politely and led us into the same room where I had sat just days earlier, only this time everything felt different. I wasn't there to ask questions. I was there for answers. A few minutes later, the door opened. Ethan walked in first. Behind him was Chloe, and behind her, Jason. Of course, he wore a confident expression like someone who believed he understood the situation better than anyone else in the room. Ethan looked tense. Chloe looked composed. Jason looked amused. I stayed seated. Mark remained standing near his desk, watching them enter with quiet attentiveness. Mr. Reed, he said. Miss Reed. Mr. Cole. Please have a seat. They did. Ethan avoided my eyes. Chloe didn't. Jason leaned back slightly as if settling in for something entertaining. So, Jason said casually, let's not make this more dramatic than it needs to be. Mark didn't respond to that. Instead, he sat down, folded his hands, and spoke calmly. This meeting is to clarify ownership and resolve any misunderstandings regarding the property located at— We know what house this is about, Chloe interrupted. Her tone was polite but sharp. Good, Mark said evenly. Then we can proceed efficiently. He reached for a folder on his desk, opened it, and placed several documents on the table. Mrs. Reed, he said, nodding toward me, is the sole legal owner of the property in question. These are the original purchase records, the deed, and the financial transfers used to acquire the home. Ethan's head lifted slightly. Chloe's expression didn't change. Jason leaned forward, glancing at the papers. That doesn't mean much, he said. Plenty of people structure ownership temporarily. It's just paperwork. Mark looked at him. Paperwork, he repeated, is exactly what defines ownership in legal terms. Silence. He slid the documents slightly closer to them. Unless there is a signed transfer of ownership, he continued, which there is not, this property remains entirely under Mrs. Reed's control. Ethan swallowed. I saw it, the moment the truth fully landed. Mom, he began, but I didn't respond. Not yet. Chloe spoke instead. We've always understood that the house would eventually be ours, she said. Danielle said as much. I turned my head slowly. That is not what I said, I replied. My voice was calm. Steady, and for the first time in weeks, unshaken. Chloe's eyes narrowed slightly. Well, that was certainly the implication, she said. Implications, Mark interjected, are not legally binding. Jason let out a quiet scoff. This is ridiculous, he said. You're acting like they've done something wrong. Mark didn't react. Instead, he reached for another document. And this, he said, placing it on the table is where things become more serious. Chloe's gaze flickered briefly. Jason leaned in again. What is that? He asked. Preliminary inquiry records, Mark replied, related to attempts to leverage the property for financial gain. Ethan's face changed, subtly, but unmistakably. What are you talking about? Chloe said quickly. Mark met her gaze. I'm referring to recent discussions with a private lending entity, he said, wherein this property was presented as a potential asset for borrowing despite the fact that neither of you have legal authority over it. Silence. Heavy. Immediate. Jason's expression faltered. Chloe's composure cracked just slightly. That's not, she began. It is documented, Mark said calmly, and if pursued further could expose all involved parties to significant legal consequences. Ethan leaned forward suddenly. We didn't finalize anything, he said quickly. It was just exploring options. Without ownership, Mark replied, those options were not yours to explore. The room shifted. Completely. This was no longer a family disagreement. This was something else. Something real. Something dangerous. I watched Ethan carefully, watched the realization settle into his face, the tension, the uncertainty, the fear, and for the first time since all of this began, he looked like the one who didn't understand what was happening. Mom, he said again, his voice quieter now, we can fix this. I looked at him, really looked, and what I saw wasn't the boy I had raised. It was a man who had made choices, and was only now beginning to understand their consequences. This was never yours to fix, I said. The words were simple, but they carried everything. For a moment after I spoke, no one said anything. The silence stretched across the room, thick and unyielding, as if the air itself had changed shape. I could hear the faint hum of traffic outside, the distant echo of a siren somewhere in the city, but inside that office everything felt contained, suspended. Ethan stared at me, not with anger, not yet, but with something else. Confusion. As if he couldn't quite reconcile the woman sitting across from him with the version of me he had been dealing with for weeks, the quiet, accommodating mother who avoided conflict and softened every edge. That woman wasn't here anymore. Chloe recovered first. She always did. This is being blown out of proportion, she said, her tone controlled but sharper now. We didn't do anything illegal. We were just trying to plan ahead. Planning ahead, Mark replied calmly, does not include representing a property as yours when it is not. Jason shifted in his seat, clearly less comfortable than before. It was a preliminary conversation, he muttered. Nothing formal. Intent matters, Mark said. And so does documentation. Chloe turned toward me, then her expression tightening. "I think what's really happening here," she said, "is that Danielle feels threatened and is reacting emotionally." Emotionally. There it was. The narrative. The one they had been building piece by piece. I felt something inside me go very still. "I'm not emotional," I said quietly. My voice didn't rise. It didn't shake. And that seemed to unsettle her more than anything else I could have done. "You locked me out of my own home in the middle of a storm," I continued. "That's not a misunderstanding. That's a decision." Ethan flinched. Just slightly, but I saw it. "That's not what happened," Chloe said quickly. "Then explain it," I replied, meeting her eyes directly. She opened her mouth, paused, closed it again, because there was no explanation that didn't reveal the truth. Ethan leaned forward, his hands clasped together now, his voice lower. "Mom, we didn't mean for it to go that far," he said. "Didn't mean," as if intention erased action. "You told me to leave," I said. "And when I didn't, you put my bag outside and locked the door behind me. I thought you'd just cool off," he said weakly. "In the rain?" I asked. He didn't answer, because there was no answer, only silence. Mark reached for another folder on his desk. "There is something else you should be aware of," he said. All eyes turned to him. He opened the folder slowly, deliberately. "Based on what Mrs. Reed has described and what has already been observed, there appears to be a pattern of behavior suggesting an attempt to establish diminished capacity." Chloe stiffened. "That's ridiculous," she said immediately. "Is it?" Mark asked calmly. Comments about forgetfulness. Questions about her ability to manage her own affairs. Statements made to neighbors suggesting cognitive decline. My chest tightened slightly. Hearing it laid out so clearly made it feel undeniable. "We were concerned," Chloe said, her voice rising now. "That's all. She's older. Things happen. I handle my life just fine," I said. "And yet, you're sitting here making this into a legal situation instead of resolving it like a family," she shot back. "Family." The word felt hollow. "You stopped treating me like family the moment you tried to take control of what wasn't yours," I replied. Jason let out a frustrated breath. "This is going nowhere," he said. "Look, what do you actually want?" The question hung in the air. Simple, direct, but heavier than anything else that had been said. I took a moment before answering, because the truth was, I already knew. "I want my home back," I said. The words were steady. "Final!" Ethan's head snapped up. "You're serious?" he asked. "Yes," I said. Chloe's expression hardened instantly. "You're going to throw us out," she said. "I'm reclaiming what belongs to me," I replied. "That's the same thing," she said sharply. "No," I said. "It's not. Because it wasn't. One was cruelty. The other was consequence." Ethan leaned back in his chair, running both hands through his hair. "This is insane," he muttered. "We live there. That's our home." I looked at him. Really looked. "And whose name is on the deed?" I asked. He didn't respond. "Who paid for it?" I continued. Still nothing. "Who trusted you with it?" I finished. That was the one that landed. I saw it in his face. The shift. The recognition. The discomfort. Chloe stood up abruptly. "This is unbelievable," she said. "After everything Ethan has done for you." "For me?" I interrupted. My voice didn't rise, but something in it cut through the room. "What exactly has he done for me, Chloe?" I asked. She hesitated, because now the burden of proof had shifted, and she didn't have it. Ethan looked between us, clearly overwhelmed. "Mom, please," he said. "We can work this out. You don't have to do this." I felt something stir in my chest. Not anger. Not anymore. Something deeper. Grief. Because for a moment, just a moment, I saw the boy he used to be. The one who would have never let this happen. But that boy wasn't sitting across from me now. "I didn't start this," I said softly, "but I will finish it." Mark leaned forward slightly. "Formal notice will be delivered today," he said. "You will be given a specific time frame to vacate the property." Chloe let out a sharp laugh. "You're serious," she said. "You're actually doing this?" "Yes," Mark replied. Jason stood up as well, his patience clearly gone. "This is a mistake," he said, pointing slightly toward me. "You're blowing up your own family over paperwork." I met his gaze. "No," I said. "My family was already blown up the moment they decided I didn't matter." The room fell silent again, but this time it felt different. Not tense, not uncertain, resolved, because the line had been drawn. Clearly, irrevocably. Ethan stood slowly. His movements were slower now, less certain. "Mom," he said. I didn't respond, because there was nothing left to say. Not here, not like this, not anymore. As they turned to leave, Chloe walked ahead, her posture rigid, her expression unreadable. Jason followed, muttering something under his breath. Ethan lingered for just a second longer, looking at me, as if searching for something. An opening, a softness, a way back. But I didn't give it to him, not because I didn't care, but because caring was no longer enough. And then he turned and walked out. The door closed behind them, quietly. But this time, it wasn't me being left outside. After they left Mark's office, the silence that followed felt heavier than anything that had been said during the meeting. I remained seated for a moment, my hands resting in my lap, my mind moving slowly through everything that had just happened. It was done. Not finished, but set in motion in a way that couldn't be undone. "Are you all right?" Mark asked gently. I looked up at him. The question lingered. Was I all right? I had just told my son to leave the house I gave him. I had watched him walk away, not in anger, not in shouting, but in something quieter, something more final. "No," I said honestly, "but I will be." Mark nodded. "That's usually how this part goes," he said. "This part." As if there were stages to something like this. Maybe there were. "What happens next?" I asked. "Now we proceed formally," he said. "The notice will be delivered today. They'll have a defined period to vacate. If they comply, this stays relatively straightforward. If they don't," he didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. I understood. "And if they try to twist things again?" I asked. "They might," he said. "But now we have documentation, evidence, and a clear legal position." Evidence. The word grounded me. Because this was no longer about who told the better story. It was about what could be proven. I left his office shortly after thanking him, though the words felt small compared to what he had done. Mrs. Parker drove me back to her house, her presence steady, comforting in a way I hadn't expected from someone who had only been a neighbor before all of this. "You did the right thing," she said as we pulled into her driveway. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I watched the house across the street, the windows, the porch, the door. The same door I had stood in front of just the night before, soaked, shaking, waiting for something that never came. "I don't know if it feels like the right thing," I said finally. She nodded. "It doesn't always," she replied, "but that doesn't mean it isn't." I carried those words with me as I stepped out of the car. The day passed slowly. Too slowly. Every hour felt stretched, suspended between what had already happened and what was still to come. Around mid-afternoon, my temporary phone rang. "Ethan." I stared at the screen for a long moment. Then I answered. "Hello, Mom, what are you doing?" he said immediately. No greeting, no softness, just tension. "I think you know," I replied. This legal thing," he said. "This is too much." "You didn't have to go that far." I closed my eyes briefly. "You locked me out in the rain," I said. "What exactly did you expect me to do? That's not what this is about," he snapped. "We had an argument. Families argue. Families don't throw each other out into a storm," I said quietly. There was a pause. Then, his tone shifted. Softer. More careful. "Mom, I'm sorry," he said. The words landed, but they didn't settle, because something about them felt incomplete. "We were both upset," he continued. "Things got out of hand, but we can fix this. You don't have to make it into something bigger. Fix this." As if it were a broken appliance. As if it hadn't already broken something much deeper. "I'm not the one who made it bigger," I said. Another pause. Longer this time. "I'll talk to Chloe," he said. "We'll work something out. You can come back. We'll set some boundaries, figure things out like adults." Like adults. The irony was almost unbearable. "Ethan," I said slowly, "do you understand what you did? Silence?" "I made a mistake," he said. "No," I replied. "You made a choice. The difference mattered. And I needed him to see it." I didn't think he began. "That's the problem," I said gently. "You didn't think about me at all." The line went quiet. For a moment I thought he might hang up. But then, "Mom, please," he said again, "don't do this." The words were familiar, but something inside me had changed. "I already have," I said. And then I ended the call. My hands trembled slightly afterward. Not from doubt, from grief, because it would have been so much easier to believe him, to accept the apology, to return, to pretend this could be smoothed over with a conversation and a few promises. But I knew better now, because apologies without change are just another form of manipulation. An hour later, Mark called. "They've received the notice," he said, and I asked. Chloe was not pleased, he replied. I almost smiled. "And Ethan quiet," he said. "But that may not last." I nodded. "What's the timeline?" I asked. "They have a limited window to vacate voluntarily," he explained. "After that, we escalate." Escalate. The word felt heavy. Necessary. But heavy. That evening, just as the sun began to set, there was another knock at Mrs. Parker's door. My heart skipped, but when she opened it, it wasn't Ethan. It was a courier, a small envelope in his hand. "For Danielle Reed," he said. I stepped forward. "That's me." He handed it to me, asked for a signature, and left. I closed the door slowly, the envelope feeling heavier than it should. "What is it?" Mrs. Parker asked. "I'm not sure," I replied. But something in my chest tightened, because I had a feeling. I opened it carefully. Inside were documents. Printed. Official. I scanned the first page, and then the second. My breath caught. "They're trying to push back," I said quietly. Mrs. Parker stepped closer. "What do you mean they've filed something?" I replied. "Not a full case, but enough to delay things." My eyes moved quickly across the lines, and then I saw it. The words that confirmed everything. Concerns regarding capacity. I closed my eyes briefly. There it was, exactly as Mark had predicted. They weren't just resisting, they were escalating, trying to turn the situation, to shift control, to rewrite the story one more time. I looked up slowly, and for the first time since all of this began, I didn't feel afraid. Because now there were no more questions, no more uncertainty, no more illusions, only truth and a choice. And this time, I was ready for both. The moment I read the words "concerns regarding capacity," something inside me settled into a kind of quiet certainty. Not panic, not even anger, just clarity. Because now there was no more pretending, no more wondering whether Ethan and Chloe were simply misguided or stressed or making poor decisions under pressure. They had chosen a path, and it was one that required turning me into someone I was not, someone incapable, someone unreliable, someone whose voice could be dismissed. I folded the papers carefully and placed them back into the envelope. "They've made their move," I said quietly. Mrs. Parker crossed her arms, her expression firm. "Then you make yours," she replied. I nodded, because I already knew what that meant. That night I called Mark again. "I received the documents," I said. "I expected you would," he replied calmly. "They're attempting to establish doubt. It's a common strategy." "It won't work," I said. There was a brief pause. "I agree," he said. "But we need to respond properly." "How?" I asked. "We document everything," he said. "We demonstrate consistency, clarity, independence, and we move forward with the eviction process." The word still felt heavy. Eviction. Not something I had ever imagined associating with my own child. "And Ethan?" I asked quietly. Mark's tone softened slightly. "Right now, Ethan is not acting as your son," he said. "He's acting as someone trying to gain control of an asset." The words stung, because they were true. Over the next few days, everything moved quickly, faster than I expected, faster than I was emotionally ready for. But perhaps that was the point. Once things reach a certain stage, they don't slow down. They accelerate. The formal response was filed. Mark handled most of it, guiding me through each step, explaining what needed to be said, what needed to be proven. My medical records were reviewed. My financial independence documented. My daily activities outlined clearly evidence of a life fully managed, fully intact. There was no room for doubt, and slowly, the narrative they had tried to build began to crack. But outside of the legal process, something else was happening. Word was spreading, not because I told anyone, but because situations like this don't stay contained. Neighbors talk, family members ask questions, details surface, and once they do, they don't always align with the story people expect. I began receiving calls, relatives I hadn't heard from in months, even years. "Danielle, is everything okay? I heard something happened. I just wanted to check on you." At first, I kept my answers simple, careful. But as more information came to light, as more people began to understand what had actually happened, the tone shifted. From curiosity to concern. From concern to quiet judgment directed not at me, but at Ethan and Chloe. I didn't take satisfaction in that. I didn't want people turning against my son, but I also wasn't going to protect him from consequences he had chosen. One afternoon, about a week after the notice had been delivered, Mark called with an update. "They're starting to feel pressure," he said. "How can you tell?" I asked. "Chloe has contacted our office twice today," he replied. "Once directly, once through Jason. And they're trying to negotiate," he said. "Not openly, but they're testing the boundaries." I sat down slowly. "What kind of negotiation? They want more time," he said. "And they're attempting to frame it as a cooperative transition." Cooperative. The word felt almost absurd. After everything that had happened. "What did you tell them?" I asked. "That cooperation requires good faith," he said. "And so far that hasn't been demonstrated." I nodded. Because it hadn't. Not once. Not genuinely. That evening I drove past the house for the first time since that night. I didn't plan to stop. I just needed to see it. From a distance, the lights were on. The same warm glow from the living room, the same shadows moving behind the curtains. For a moment, it looked exactly like it used to. Normal, peaceful, like nothing had changed. But I knew better. Because I knew what had happened inside those walls, what had been said, what had been done, and what had been broken. I didn't stop the car. I didn't get out. I just kept driving. Because I wasn't going back like that. Not anymore. A few days later, everything came to a head. The court process moved forward. Faster than I expected. Perhaps because the evidence was clear. Perhaps because the attempt to challenge my capacity had no real foundation. Or perhaps because sometimes the truth is simply too strong to ignore. Ethan and Chloe were given a final deadline. A date. A point at which they would have to leave. And for the first time since all of this began, there was no more delay, no more strategy, no more illusion of control, just reality. The day they moved out, I didn't go to the house. I couldn't. I wasn't ready to stand there and watch it happen. Instead, I waited. At Mrs. Parker's, sitting quietly, hands folded, listening to the ticking of the clock on the wall. Every minute felt heavier than the last, until finally, my phone rang. It was Mark. "It's done," he said. Just 2 words. But they carried everything. "They vacated the property," he continued. "The house is yours again. Yours again." I closed my eyes, took a slow breath, and for a moment, I felt something unexpected. Not relief, not satisfaction. Something quieter, lonelier. Because I had regained my house, but I had lost something else. Something I couldn't reclaim through legal documents. "Thank you," I said softly. After the call ended, I sat there for a long time. Not moving, not speaking, just feeling the weight of it all. Victory doesn't always feel like winning. Sometimes it feels like standing alone in a place that used to be full. That evening, I returned to the house. My house. The key felt unfamiliar in my hand, as if it belonged to someone else. I unlocked the door slowly. Stepped inside, and was met with silence. Deep, complete. The furniture was still there. The walls unchanged, but the energy was different, empty, echoing. I walked through each room carefully. The living room, the kitchen, the hallway, each space holding traces of what had been and what would never be again. When I reached the basement stairs, I paused, looked down, at the place I had stayed. The place where everything had begun to shift, and for a moment, I allowed myself to feel it. The grief, the loss, the reality. Then I straightened, took a breath, and stepped forward. Because this wasn't the end. It was something else, something quieter, something harder, but also something new. The first night back in the house felt unfamiliar. Not because anything had changed physically, the walls were the same, the floors unchanged, the furniture still in place, but because everything inside me had I stood in the entryway for a long time after I closed the door behind me, listening to the silence. It wasn't the peaceful kind. It was the kind that echoes, the kind that reminds you what used to fill it. I set my bag down slowly and walked into the living room. The couch was exactly where it had always been. The lamp by the window cast the same soft glow. For a moment, I could almost imagine Ethan sitting there scrolling through his phone, Chloe in the kitchen, the quiet rhythm of a shared home unfolding like it once did. But that life was gone, and pretending otherwise would only keep me stuck in something that no longer existed. So instead of lingering, I moved. Room by room, window by window, opening curtains, letting light in. Not because the house needed it, but because I did. The next morning I woke up earlier than usual. Not out of habit, out of purpose. There's something about reclaiming a space that demands action, not just emotionally but physically. I couldn't just sit in the past. I had to reshape the present. So I started small, cleaning, rearranging, letting go of what didn't belong to me anymore. Chloe's decorative choices were the first to go. The carefully curated pillows, the framed prints that had never felt like mine, the cold, polished aesthetic that had replaced warmth with appearance. I didn't throw everything away, but I made it mine again, piece by piece, choice by choice. By the third day, something shifted. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt open, like it was waiting, not for what had been, but for what could still become. That was when I made a decision. One I hadn't planned but somehow felt right. I wasn't going to live in that house alone. Not like that. Not in a space that had once been filled with tension, silence, and unspoken conflict. I needed something different, something alive. So I rented out part of the house. Her name was Paula Simmons, a librarian, 52, recently divorced. She moved in quietly, respectfully, carrying only what she needed and asking very little in return. And somehow, that was exactly what the house needed. What I needed. Paula didn't ask questions about the past. She didn't pry. She didn't judge. We shared occasional meals, simple conversations, small moments of normalcy that slowly replaced the heaviness that had once filled every corner. And for the first time in a long while, the house felt like a home again. Not the same home, but a new one, rebuilt, reclaimed. And then slowly, I began rebuilding myself too. Mark had encouraged me to stay involved, to not withdraw, he had said. This kind of experience can isolate people if they let it, so I didn't. I joined a local legal aid group that worked with older adults, helping them understand their rights, their finances, their protections. At first, I wasn't sure what I could offer, but then I realized I had something many of them didn't. Experience. I knew what the warning signs looked like, the subtle manipulation, the language, the pressure, the shift from care to control. And as I spoke with others, listened to their stories, I realized something that both comforted and saddened me. I wasn't alone, not even close. There were so many women like me, strong, independent, capable, but targeted because of trust, because of love, because of family. And so I stayed, week after week, not just helping others, but healing something inside myself. Then one afternoon, months later, something unexpected happened. There was a knock at the door. I wasn't expecting anyone. Paula was at work. The house was quiet. I opened the door slowly, and there he was, Ethan. For a moment, neither of us spoke. He looked different, thinner, more tired. The confidence he once carried so easily was gone, replaced by something quieter, something uncertain. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was softer than I remembered. I studied him carefully. "Hi, Ethan." He shifted slightly, glancing down before meeting my eyes again. "Can I come in?" he asked. I hesitated, not out of fear, but out of awareness, because this moment mattered, and I wasn't going to rush it. After a few seconds, I stepped aside. He entered slowly, as if unsure of his place, as if he understood finally that this space was no longer his by default. We sat in the living room, the same one where so much had happened, but now it felt different, neutral, honest. "I heard you've been helping people," he said after a moment. "I have," I replied. "That's good," he said. Silence followed. Not uncomfortable, but real. Then he spoke again. Chloe and we're not together anymore. I didn't react immediately. Not because I didn't care, but because I needed to hear the rest. It didn't work out, he added. The understatement of the year. What happened? I asked. He let out a small, tired breath. Everything he said. There was no anger in his voice. No blame. Just truth. And something else. Regret. I lost a lot, he continued quietly. I looked at him. You did, I said. He nodded. I became someone I don't recognize, he admitted. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Honest. For the first time since all of this began, I believed him. Not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. There was no performance, no manipulation, no expectation, just awareness. And that changed something. Not everything, but something. I'm not here to ask for anything, he added quickly. I needed to say that. I nodded slowly. I hear you, I said. He looked at me searching. For forgiveness. For something. But I didn't give it. Not yet. Because some things take time. And some things have to be earned. The first time Ethan came back after that visit, he didn't knock. He stood at the edge of the driveway, waiting. It was early morning, the kind where the air is crisp but not yet cold, the sky just beginning to shift from gray to soft blue. I had stepped outside with a cup of coffee, planning to sit on the porch for a few quiet minutes before the day began. That's when I saw him. Not approaching, not calling out, just standing there, hands in his pockets. As if unsure whether he had the right to come any closer, for a moment I simply watched him. This man, my son, who had once moved through this space without hesitation, without question, now stood at a distance waiting for permission. And that more than anything told me something had changed. I walked toward the edge of the porch. Good morning, I said. He looked up quickly. Morning, he replied. His voice was soft, careful. I didn't want to disturb you, he added. I just came by to drop something off. He gestured toward a small bag near his feet. What is it? I asked. Groceries, he said. Just some things I thought you might need. I glanced at the bag, then back at him. You didn't have to do that. I know, he said. And that was the difference. Before, everything he did came with expectation. Now, there was none. I'll take them, I said. Not as a reward, not as forgiveness. Just as acknowledgement. He picked up the bag and walked toward the steps, but stopped just short of the porch. Is it okay if I leave them here? He asked. I nodded. He set the bag down carefully, then stepped back again. Always that distance. Always that awareness. Days turned into weeks, and slowly, without words, a pattern formed. He would come by occasionally, never unannounced at the door, always waiting, always respectful. Sometimes it was groceries. Sometimes it was something small, a replaced outdoor light bulb, a repaired loose railing, a bag of salt for the walkway. He never asked to come inside, never assumed, never pushed, and I watched. Because this wasn't about gestures, it was about consistency. Anyone can say the right thing once, but change, real change, shows up over time. One afternoon, as winter began to settle in, I found him kneeling by the front steps, spreading salt carefully across the icy patches. You're gonna hurt your back like that, I said from the doorway. He looked up, startled, then smiled faintly. I've been doing worse lately, he said. I stepped outside, pulling my coat tighter around me. You don't have to do this, I told him. I know, he replied. Again. That same answer. Simple. Honest. Without expectation. We stood there for a moment, the cold air between us, but not the same cold as before. This one was clearer, cleaner. I started counseling, he said suddenly. I looked at him. Have you? He nodded. Twice a week, he added. I needed to understand how I got there. There, the place where he had become someone capable of locking his own mother out of her home. I didn't respond right away, because part of me still struggled with the weight of that, still carried it, still felt it in quiet moments. I'm not asking you to forgive me, he continued. I know I don't deserve that yet. Yet, the word mattered. because it meant he understood something he hadn't before. That forgiveness isn't owed, it's earned. "I'm just trying to be better," he said. I studied him carefully, and for the first time, I didn't see entitlement, or defensiveness, or expectation. I saw effort, and that mattered. More than words, more than apologies, more than anything else he could have said. "I see that," I said quietly. His shoulders relaxed slightly, not completely, but enough. As winter deepened the memory of that night, the rain, the cold, the door never fully left me. Some wounds don't disappear, they settle. They become part of you, but they don't have to define you. One evening, nearly a year later, another storm rolled in. Not rain this time. Snow, heavy, relentless, the kind that blankets everything in silence. I stood at the front window watching it fall, remembering, because it was impossible not to. The same house, the same porch, the same place where everything had changed. Then I heard it. A knock, soft, careful. I opened the door, and there he was, Ethan, holding a bag and something else, a shovel. "I figured you might need help clearing the walkway," he said, his breath visible in the cold air, his hands red from the temperature. "I also brought some extra supplies," he added, "just in case." I looked at him, really looked, and for a moment, time folded. Not back to what it was, but forward, to what it could still become. "Come in," I said. The words were quiet, but they carried something significant. Not forgiveness, not yet, but something else. A door opening. This time, by choice. He stepped inside slowly, carefully, as if aware of the weight of that moment. We stood there in the entryway. The same place, but not the same people. "I don't expect anything," he said. "I know," I replied, and that was why. This time, it was different. I didn't give him the house. I didn't restore what had been lost overnight. I didn't erase the past, because love doesn't mean forgetting, and forgiveness doesn't mean removing consequences. What I gave him instead was something harder, a chance to rebuild, to prove, to become someone worthy of trust again, and that was something no document could ever guarantee. If there's one thing I've learned through all of this, it's that love without boundaries is not love, it's surrender. For most of my life, I believed that being a good mother meant giving without limits, supporting, sacrificing, trusting that love would be returned in the right way at the right time. But the truth is, not everyone values what they are given. And when you give too much without protecting yourself, you don't just risk losing your possessions, you risk losing your voice, your dignity, and your place in your own life. What happened to me wasn't just about a house, it was about control. About being slowly pushed into a role I never chose, someone weak, dependent, and easy to override. And I know now that many women, especially later in life, face the same quiet danger. From the very people they trust the most. That's why boundaries matter. Not because you don't love your family, but because you do. Because real love does not demand that you disappear. It does not require you to be smaller, quieter, or easier to manage. And forgiveness, it doesn't mean pretending nothing happened. It means allowing someone the opportunity to change without removing the consequences of their actions. Ethan didn't get everything back, but he got something more valuable, a chance to become better. And I got something too, myself. If you've ever felt dismissed, controlled, or betrayed by someone you trusted, I want you to know this. You are not powerless. You are not invisible. And it is never too late to stand up for your own life. I'd love to hear from you. Would you have forgiven him? Where are you watching from, and what time is it there right now? Have you ever had to set boundaries with someone you love? If this story touched you in any way, please like and fan. Subscribe. Stories like this matter, and so do you.